they are the only ones with similar power to the drug companies. So I'm actually working with a few insurance companies because they are paying, and they know that life expectancy is dropping internationally. They know that multiple morbidity is claiming people. I see big pharma and big food claiming more and more lives, but there is hope. There is hope. And one thing I would say is that our audit from what we achieved at Norwood Avenue is the most popular paper that BMJ Nutrition has ever published. And that means that BMJ Nutrition will take other papers from me because they know that people read them.
Welcome to the Plant-Free MD podcast with Dr. Anthony Chaffee, where we discuss diet and nutrition and how this affects health and chronic disease, and show you how you can use this to optimize your health and happiness, both mentally and physically. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Plant-Free MD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and today I have a very special guest, Dr. David Unwin, who I've been looking forward to speaking to for quite some time. Dr. Unwin, thank you so much for joining.
You're so welcome.
Great. So for people that haven't come across you and your work, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, so I'm a general practitioner just north of Liverpool in the UK. I've looked after the same population since 1986. So that's quite some continuity for those patients. What else? I'm obsessed really with the true causes of so many of the chronic diseases of modern life. And that's been a great adventure because it's led me into a whole new world of preventative medicine, but also actually curing chronic illnesses rather than using drugs. So it's lifestyle medicine instead of lifelong medication. I suppose the headline is that of all the people with type 2 diabetes in our 9,000 patient practice, we've got 20% of everybody with diabetes into drug-free type 2 diabetes remission.
Very good.
We've published a lot of papers. We've published about 20 papers. Some of them are quite well known. We've done a BBC documentary that went out to 4 million people, The Truth About Carbs. And I'm a Royal College of General Practitioners clinical expert advisor on diabetes. So that's probably enough for you to start off with.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting about the documentary about BBC. I haven't seen that yet. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So the BBC contacted me with a challenge, and they said, okay, so you're doing good work in your practice, but could you replicate that work in the most deprived practice in Merseyside? So they found me the hardest practice with the poorest patients, and then they did over 8 weeks. I replicated what I do in my own practice with a lovely group of Liverpudlians, and it was very, very moving, and I hope it made great television. I got so fond of those people, and the usual things happened. They lost weight, their belly size went down, blood pressure improved. I think self-esteem is what I saw. I saw those people come alive when they'd never thought that they could take charge of their own health. It had never occurred to them that there was an alternative to drugs, and it was very successful. It was with, I don't know whether you've heard about the Van Tulpen twins, these identical twin doctors who are very famous here in the UK. And they've written a book now on food addiction, so they've followed up that, and they're actually coming to the PHC conference that we'll be talking about in a bit. So that led on to many, many other interesting things, and a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. What was the name of that BBC documentary so we can go and check that out?
The Truth About Carbs.
Truth About Carbs.
They did a series of different ones on food, and that was The Truth About Carbs.
Right.
And so we were I mean, the headline thing was that people didn't realize that a small bowl of cornflakes is the same as 8 or 9 teaspoons of sugar, or a small bowl of mashed potatoes. So the truth being, we were showing these people with diabetes and obesity the truth about how starchy carbohydrates digest down into sugar. And clearly, if you have diabetes, you're trying to avoid a high blood sugar. So for them, it wasn't a difficult concept. The important thing was that teaching them how to shop and how to cook, because in these very poor areas, they didn't have fully functioning kitchens. So it was all microwavable stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, that would definitely make it very difficult as well. I think that's the disconnect that there is in the system a bit, because the patients are more than happy to make changes if they're given this information. I mean, some won't care, some will say, but some of you say, look, if your diabetes will improve, you want to get your blood sugars down, you can take all these medicines, or a better way is you just cut out these carbohydrates and all these sorts of things. And they say, oh, really? Great. I had a conversation with a lady who's when I was on my on call for neurosurgery, and her child was having these weird issues, and I ended up figuring out that she was having seizures, very sort of odd presentation of seizures. And I was like, okay, look, she's seizing. We need to get her taken care of. And I spoke to the mom and I said, oh, by the way, if you just don't give her carbs and get her on a ketogenic diet, there's about 100 years of data on this showing that this actually improves epilepsy. And she said, oh, really? No one told me that. I was like, yeah, it's easy. He's like, oh yeah, we'll do that right now. It's like, it was very quick. It was very easy. And it didn't cost anything. And I think that a lot of people really genuinely appreciate being told these sorts of things, as opposed to, I know the American Diabetic Association, at least for a while, was saying, you don't have to limit carbs, just make sure you dose insulin appropriately and keep them on the right medication to keep the blood sugar under control. And, that makes sense when you realize, that they're being funded by the people selling insulin. And so, but what you really need to do is it's a carbohydrate problem, not an insulin problem. In fact, there's too much insulin already.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I find the same is if you offer people an alternative, if you say today, I could start lifelong medication, but there is an alternative. And do you know, I've been doing this 12 years now. Not one patient in 12 years has opted for the drugs if you give them the alternative. Not a single patient. Every one of them has said, that's interesting. And I said, yeah, and you could probably lose weight as well, get your belly down a bit, get your blood pressure down. And they say, tell me more. I'm often asked, well, or told really that, well, doctor, I mean, you can manage it, but my patients would never give up bread. They'd never give up cornflakes. And it depends how you put it. The thing about behavior change is motivation. And so few people are comfortable with lifelong medication. They're really interested in an alternative. And it doesn't take very long. And it can save loads of money in our own practice. On the diabetes drug budget alone, we save about £70,000 sterling each year.
Yeah, wow.
Because of this. Because if case after case after case you're offering an alternative and you don't start drugs, then after a few years you find, well, we are now the cheapest in a 50-mile radius, the cheapest practice in terms of drugs for diabetes, because the whole team are offering this. So it is an approach that can pay for itself, because the drug costs, no country that I travel all over the world, there isn't a country that is finding it easy to fund the drugs for chronic disease. And we're offering an alternative.
Yeah. And just imagine if all the GP practices offered that. I mean, if you just, £76,000 every practice. I mean, that's
well,
a
we've
huge
done the
savings.
sums in one of the publications. Somebody contacted me and said, I've done the sums for you, because in England, the drug budget is we can find out what it is. And I can tell you that if every GP prescribed as our practice does, the saving per year would be £270 million.
Wow.
So we know the kind of sums of money. And that, of course, is just on diabetes. So when you add in essential hypertension, and then you might go into dermatology, and you might go into joints being like all of the things that you're aware of, then actually it's possible that's a tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I think so. I was looking at some data and statistics on exactly this and the amount of money that we spend as a planet on these so-called non-communicable chronic diseases, which are only getting worse. They're more prevalent. So from the Harvard School of Public Health, they crunch the numbers on just 5 NCDs. So diabetes, cardiovascular disease, respiratory and pulmonary disease, cancers, and mental health issues. And so just those 5, not even autoimmunity, which is hugely expensive with all the different, biologics that people are on, that those account or will account for over $13 trillion in medical spending and costs worldwide by 2030. And that's nearly doubled from 2010. So this is just going up and up and up. So the idea that people say like, well, this is just a screening thing. We're getting better at diagnosing. Of course it's not. This is treatment costs. These are good. These are getting more and more expensive to treat. And so yes, you can get new treatments, but at the same time, a lot of these things are off patent and you're just using the normal sort of drugs. So it's just the burden of disease is getting larger and larger. And then that doesn't even take into account the human costs and the lost productivity and the sick days and the people going on disability and other sorts of things. And that accounted for about $46 trillion, trillion with a T, between 2010 and 2030. And then just the cost of lost lives of premature deaths was estimated to be in 2010, I think $22 trillion. And then by 2030, it's estimated to be over $40 trillion. So again, there's this doubling. So this is just getting worse. And so clearly what we're doing, we're getting all these advancements in technology, supposedly in medicine, and yet things are just getting worse. And so it doesn't matter what system you have, it doesn't matter what budget you have, nothing is going to withstand the pressure of this growing burden of disease.
I think that's how I came to this in the first place, because in my practice, starting from 1986 to 2012, I'd noticed an 8-fold increase in the number of people with type 2 diabetes.
Wow.
So that is an epidemic. It's really bad. And we had no extra money or staff to look after that 8-fold increase. On top of which, I noticed that the drugs I was using, they didn't make that much difference. It was so rare that you didn't see people sparkling with health. They to me, they were getting sicker and sicker, and I was adding drug after drug and then drugs for the side effects of the drugs. And it was really miserable. As a doctor, it was miserable. What must it be like for the patients? And I would say every older doctor like me has seen that pattern, a pattern of diabetes, a pattern of central obesity, colorectal cancer, breast cancer, and mental health. Everything deteriorating. And this, for me, is the urgency of this, because it's getting worse. And the people suffering with these diseases, particularly metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes, are getting much younger. So that I never, ever, ever saw type 2 diabetes in somebody under 50. I didn't see it in medical school. And in fact, we called it maturity onset diabetes in those days.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it was a thing that didn't matter very much because older people got it. And oddly, though, we did teach them to cut the carbs. At medical school, that's what we taught. And then very gradually, that was forgotten. That knowledge of carb counting was forgotten. And it was all about forget the carbohydrates, use drugs, a bit like you were saying earlier. the tragedy of using insulin with type 2 diabetes when you're insulin resistant. It's bonkers. You're insulin resistant and hyperinsulinemic, and the answer is more insulin. And that's how bonkers this has become. And I don't know, I knew that medicine had lost joy, had lost its way. And so I can't tell you the difference it's made. And that's what keeps an old guy like me still behind the desk, because it's every day I'm seeing cheerful, well people, which I didn't do for about 25 years.
Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia, Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass-fed and finished pasture-raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high-fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. Yeah, well, that I remember that transition from adult onset diabetes and juvenile diabetes to type 1 and 2. I was a kid in the 90s, and that I remember a news program coming on talking about this kid who had adult onset diabetes and fatty liver disease. And they're saying, how can this be? He's a child. How can a child get adult onset diabetes? Only adults get adult onset diabetes. That's why it's named that. And only alcoholics get fatty liver disease. And this kid's never touched a drop of alcohol. And so instead of thinking about it for a second, saying, okay, well, what changed? Is there something in our environment that could be affecting this? They just said, it was probably happening all the time and we just didn't notice it. This is just a screening issue. Yeah.
And that was the beginning of the deceit.
Yeah.
The beginning of the deceit and the beginning of an international conspiracy on don't think too much about why your patients are ill. You just need to keep up to date with the most modern treatments. And I swallowed that for a very long time, You mentioned fatty liver, which is another obsession of mine. I mean, we've come to a point now where 38% of the whole of the developed world has fatty liver.
Wow.
Why are there not placards in the streets? Why, how come media is silent on this? So interesting, but 38%. And in fact, I audited our own patients. I thought, I wonder if that's true. Why don't we just audit? And sure enough, if you look at triglyceride, if you look at liver function like gamma GT or ALT, we found a third of our patients have abnormal results. A third. Wow. I mean, what are we waiting for? Because the consequences of ignoring fatty liver, they are serious. Mind you, I'm guilty because I don't know how you used to deal with fatty liver. I just used to say to patients, yeah, it's really common. We'll just do the blood tests again in maybe a year. Perhaps you could exercise more and, eat a bit less. Yeah. I would just fob them off, really. We'll do it, just kick it along the road. And I'm so embarrassed. I had patients, I was doing that for years. Or the other thing was, one of my patients was, I remember 3 separate specialists told her she probably drank alcohol. And she really didn't. And since she's gone low carb, her liver function has been normal now for over a decade. I saw her Wednesday of last week looking fabulous. And I'd sent her to 3 separate specialists to be told off and humiliated. And then when she went low carb, her liver was better, and the improvement was one of the first things. It happens really fast. Your liver cheers up before the blood pressure, before your blood sugar. It's a really fast transformation, the improvement in liver function.
Yeah, wow. Well, that's really great. Have you ever come across sort of a sticky patient that goes low carb, but still sort of has a bit of issue getting their liver function numbers to improve?
Yes. Well, I mean, I've come across a lot. I'm now fascinated by, I don't call them sticky patients.
Well, sticky bloods anyway.
My wife, Jen, she's a psychologist and she's dead clever. And she's she's taught me really to look at patients not as a problem, but as an interesting case, and to be interested and curious about why things are not improving. And there are various reasons. The commonest one, I'd say, is people who are carb addicted and who struggle with low carb. And the more I've started thinking about carb addiction and looking into it and discussing it with patients, the more I'm convinced this is a problem. And of course, I didn't find a single patient with carb addiction in the first 25 years of my life as a doctor. And that is because I never asked them. If you don't ask, you will never find them. And many doctors will say, well, I haven't got any patients with that. Well, it's because you don't ask. If I ask people, are you struggling to give up bread? And they say, God, it's so difficult in every clinic I'm doing. So some of the people whose results are not improving are struggling with the diet. Some of them, there's a mystery. I'm always sort of hunting the sugar. I had one patient who had fatty liver and type 2 diabetes, and he was low carb. But what I didn't know was that he drank 6 pints of milk a day. Oh. And if every 100 mils of milk has got 4 or 5 grams of sugar in it, which it has, that was his problem. And I never asked him what he drank. And I find, and I've had people with sweet corn or beetroot, people who eat vast amounts of things you'd never guess. And I must say, I've become very interested in the use of continuous glucose monitors now for these intriguing cases. And so I prescribe against the guidelines. We're not allowed to, but I do anyway. I wait for the day that I'm in jail. I'm sure, Anthony, you'll come and visit me when I'm in jail.
Definitely.
And I prescribe against the guidelines because I believe it's morally the thing to do, because patients find out what's causing those spikes and learn. Because the faster you get feedback from the behavior, the faster you learn. A hemoglobin A1C is a very, very blunt tool, the average of 2 to 3 months. Continuous glucose monitor, you get that spike, you know what you just consumed. And I'm finding them so useful in clinical practice for people whose results are not as good as I would expect. I would finally, before you come in, just say there's one to clinicians, I would say. If you have people whose blood sugars are not improving and they are losing weight, that's odd. That's really odd. So if you have somebody who's losing weight, but the blood sugar's going up, it can either be a carcinoma head of pancreas, or it could be a misdiagnosed type 1 diabetic. And I've found 2 in the last year, because of course we've got hundreds of them. I found 2 in the last year who needed insulin because they were actually type 1. And it's really important that no clinician misses that pattern of weight going down, blood sugar going up. And I've got some wonderful graphs that I put on Twitter to illustrate this, because every nurse, every doctor needs to look out for that pattern. It's rare, but one of these people ended up in hospital and was very ill. So anyway, I'll shut up now.
No, that's perfect. Thank you very much for that. So how did you come across the low carb sort of diet and use as a treatment modality for your patients?
How did I come across it?
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned this before. I had never come across it till 2012 when a patient had stopped taking her metformin. And so, of course, I wrote to her with the intention of telling her off. And I was in for a surprise because she came and told me off. And she said, I haven't needed your metformin for months. You never once told me that cornflakes, bread, rice were all sugar. And since I've got low carb, my blood sugars are normal. I've lost 2 or 3 stone in weight. Your metformin gave me diarrhea. And now I don't need metformin of normal blood sugars. And she said, Dr. Unwin, I'm wondering whether you're even qualified.
Oh.
I think you've something to learn. I was dead scared. And I'm sure, Anthony, if a patient asks if you're qualified, you should be frightened. And I had the good sense to listen, to shut up and listen, And she was online with 40,000 other people. This is back in 2012, learning about low carb, and they were being rubbished by doctors like me and like you. And I determined to learn fast. And that's how it all started. And the results astonished me. I'd not seen drugs achieve anything like this before, to the extent that I was frightened of publishing my results because I thought I'd been labeled as a fraud. And it wasn't until Professor Roy Taylor, who's a very well-known professor in the world of type 2 diabetes, I sent him my data, and he said, I will help you publish this. It's very, very important. And since then, as I say, we've published about 20 papers. I think clinicians, we're always in the shadow of academics. And one of my personal things is that auditing your results, showing the world what's possible, is just as important as anything an academic does. They suggest things, they can talk about possible physiological mechanisms for things happening. But in the real world, we can show what is possible. And I think that I have devoted my life in the NHS to show what is possible in the British NHS. We're strapped for cash. And I can tell you now, it's possible for people who go low carb, it's possible to get about 50% of them into drug-free remission. And I've been doing that for years. There's 2 more in the pipeline. I've got 100. So I hadn't met a single one in 25 years. Then I met one. And this week, I know I'm meeting somebody on Thursday who will be my 138th successful drug-free remission. And I have 2 more in the pipeline. So I'm showing what is possible. And it's not just diabetes, it's blood pressure, it's liver function, it's triglyceride, it's lipid profiles, and even mental health. I keep wondering where this is going to end, but it's very, very exciting, and I know you're excited in a similar way.
Very much so. I hope that it ends in people being a lot healthier, and the end to this rash of chronic diseases that are plaguing humankind and only getting worse. So hopefully it does end that. I often think about how, we talked about the financial burden, but the human cost is so tragic. 90% of the deaths in America and Australia, and I would imagine in the UK and Europe, are secondary to these non-communicable chronic diseases. Only 10% of the deaths come from something outside of that.
Yeah.
Those 90% don't need to exist, in my view.
And it isn't even deaths, is it, Anthony? Because for about 10 years before you actually die, you're starting to build up a whole matrix of chronic misery, diseases, aches, pains, poor mobility, poor mental health. And I think, it's being talked about not just lifespan, but what is your health span? Can you still work? So I'm 65 and I can run.
Right.
I can outrun all my grandchildren. Not one of them can outrun me yet.
Nice.
They will, obviously, and it's my challenge. They can, but anyway, I think that's personally great, and that so much of what I saw I put down to age, including these things in myself too. I had moderate hypertension and diabetes. And I was tired all the time. I used to have a little sleep at lunchtime on my own couch and wake myself up with coffee and chocolate. And it wasn't age. And this is what you hear from patients. They think they'd accepted poor health, thinking, well, I'm over 50, I'm slowing down now. And what I would say as an older person is maybe that's not true. And in fact, what a message of hope if it isn't true. What if you're not finished? And that's certainly been true for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, adding so much to people's life as well, because of course it's not just about the deaths. You're losing decades of life, and even though you're not dead, you're sick, you're unwell, and I mean, even just the things to the side. I mean, here in Australia, it's a 4.5 year wait to get in to see us in the neurosurgical department. And so some of these people have quite a lot of pain, they have radiculopathy and pinched nerves and other sorts of things. If it's not a life or limb threatening emergency, they have to wait. And there's over 20,000 people right now waiting.
Yeah.
And so it's quite a large wait list. But then you see these people, and then I have people calling in saying, "Hey, look, this patient is really unwell. They can't work. They're just debilitated in pain. It's just medications all the time, and there's nothing you can do for them because your hands are tied." But when I do talk to people in my other capacity, in my practice in metabolic medicine, lifestyle medicine, affecting the things that we can actually affect, their pain resolves massively. And these sort of chronic diseases that they're waiting to see a specialist for just go away. And
I've had that lots of times. I'd cite sleep apnea as an example. We have a very long waiting list for anything to do with sleep apnea. And it's a matter of personal pride that not a single patient that's come to me with sleep apnea has actually needed that clinic appointment. Because I say to them, okay, this is really sad. What's the sleep apnea clinic going to do? Are you going to get a CPAP mask? Or, it's not great really to be like that. Shall we have a go while you're on the waiting list?
mm-hmm.
And it's not generally known, but I think I saw this, I think it was an Australian paper, that sleep apnea, there is fatty infiltration of the tongue, like the liver. And of course, you can scan the tongue and the fat shines. And they have a big tongue with fat in it. And when you go low carb, you start to eat your own fat. You become a fat burner. And the youngest guy I've done this for is 28 years old, a married man of 28, and it's transformed his life. He was so heavy when he first came to me, we couldn't weigh him. We didn't have the machinery to actually weigh this guy. What's interesting was his motivation. I'm always fascinated by why would you do this? And for him, it was to be a better dad. And, he goes camping now with his children. It's changed his life. And he's weighable now. He's lost, I don't know, in Australia, are you kilos or are you stones or what are you?
Kilos, and I'm pounds, so hit me.
Right. Okay. So he's lost, I would say, somewhere about 100 kilos in weight. We're estimating because I used to measure his waist with a piece of string because his waist was somewhere over 1.5 meters.
Wow.
And just imagine what his life was like. But anyway, what did it for him was he was one of these cases I'm curious and excited with the potential. And he was referred. So now there are 9 doctors in the practice, and they tend to send me the ones they find difficult. And I change that into something of a personal challenge, and I'm curious. And they give me such joy. And that young guy, he comes to see me. I did this about 3 years ago, and he comes to see me every 6 months just to shake my hand and say, I'm still fine. I'm still fine.
Yeah.
And that is why I'm a doctor, that reason.
Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor at Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys. Well, that's a great reason. I think that is what people think of when they say, I'm going to go into medicine, I'm going to cure people, I'm going to heal people, I'm going to help people. And unfortunately, there are things that we can help and we can heal and we can cure. But again, 90% of what we're treating now are these chronic progressive diseases that don't have a cure, supposedly. And so the vast majority of your time is spent managing symptoms and managing these diseases as opposed to curing them, which is sort of a very defeating sense. I would imagine, like that's not.
Well, that was me. I was mildly depressed. Every day was full of failure. I was thinking of leaving medicine. I decided to, most of my friends retired aged 55. The great majority of all my friends. I'm now ancient in terms of general practice at 65. I'm an anomaly. And I was going to go too. But you're right. And when you're young, you're full of hope and you want to make a difference, don't you? That's why most people, it's not about becoming rich as a doctor. It actually is about making a change. And I felt I'd failed completely. And now that's why I'm still there. And I think so many of our colleagues are exhausted. They're really exhausted because they're just shoveling day after day. And there's nothing to sustain them because they're not getting any joy. And if you can find joy in medicine, it's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. Well, I've certainly found this to be very rewarding and very fulfilling when you can see this. And, I have patients come in sometimes and I change their diet and I tell them how it's going to affect them. And I tell them, if they do these things, this should be what they should expect to see. And that happens, especially when people can stick to it. And we see their blood work and that all is improving and their weight's improving, their health is improving, all these little problems are going away. And I get patients coming in and they say, they tell me all the different things that have improved and how much better they feel. And they say, well, you already know this. You see this all the time. I was like, it's always amazing to hear. Like it always puts a smile on my face.
You're right. That's so true. I never tire of these stories of joy and hope. And I love looking at the blood work. I used to hate, every day, here we go through the misery. And now I actually it's a treat for me to go through the blood work because I'm so interested to see how people are doing, particularly the hemoglobin A1Cs, the triglyceride levels and the liver function. And I keep it as a treat to go through the blood work. And then as an extra thing, I ring patients up, just 2 minutes, just telling you it's amazing. I never rang patients. And now I'm often saying, listen, and they're dead scared. Why have you rung? Oh, because you've got the best results for 10 years. I just had to tell you. And how many doctors are ringing up patients with the best results for years? And I tell you, I am doing that in every clinic I do. Saying, I've got people saying, this is the best you've been for so long. Another thing I'd say is one of the ways we did this, we didn't have the money to see people individually. And my partners actually forbade me from doing this work, even though I was senior partner. We had terrible arguments, terrible arguments. They said, you're not paid to do this kind of work. This is prevention. And so it was Jen's idea. Why don't we do it in our own time for free on a Monday night and do group consultations? So we just wrote to people and we just wrote to them, particularly the pre-diabetics, and invited them in tranches of 20. And I went low carb with my patients and learned with them. And what a wonderful experience that was. And we're still doing these group consultations 12 years on. There was one last Wednesday evening, and we run them when working people can come. You can bring whoever's cooking and shopping. And what we have now is a whole lot of expert patients, and they are helping with the work because they're helping with the ones who just come, the newbies. And I'd say again, this is we need to think about original ways to get this out there. Because one-to-one, it's going to take a long time one-to-one, but group consultations will help. As you probably know, I use social media. So I've got a large following on Twitter. And every day I'm spending half an hour on Twitter trying to educate, trying to get this message out. And then again, the media. We had 3 pages in one of our major newspapers last week, the Daily Express. We had the front page of the Daily Express. That's how this is moving ahead in the UK. The actual front page and 2 pages inside, including a patient of mine with a before and after photo. And those before and after photos, they're powerful because they help you believe.
Yeah, amazing. So that's a good question. Well, how do you see this going, and what do you think we need to do to get this more mainstream? Because we're fighting against the food and drug companies that are pumping out billions of dollars to push out their studies and their disease management protocols, because that's what makes them money, and that's fair enough. I understand the idea, but we obviously want to cure diseases. So how do we get this out here, and how do you see it going?
It's a great question. I begin with inexorable courtesy. Inexorable courtesy, because people have different views, particularly over nutrition. And I have come to see that it doesn't help to argue with people. And so I think this is an area for being polite. But this is why I audit to show what's possible. So I hope I'm polite, I hope I'm curious, but I'm auditing, I'm keeping records of what I do. And then how do we make it bigger? How do we make it bigger? Well, in the UK, 16 of us set up a charity called the Public Health Collaboration. So Jen and I, we discovered that we weren't alone, that there were other clinicians who were horrified by what was happening in the field of public health. And we were saddened by the quality of information that was out there. And so we decided to set up a charity. It's called the Public Health Collaboration. So I don't know whether you have charities or do you call them not-for-profit, but this is a British charity. And because there are many jobs to be done, so we have all sorts of different levels, but we've trained hundreds of ambassadors, hundreds. So no GP in the whole of the United Kingdom is more than 10 miles away from one of our trained ambassadors who would help that doctor run group consultations for free. So a public health collaboration, Nicola helps us run groups and has done for ages and brings food and runs the WhatsApp group. So that's free help for tired healthcare professionals. The public health collaboration is now, we've got a sort of higher level of people with much more training. This is the TLC, which is a service we offer for GPs who want a more qualified health coach. And health coaching is about supplying information. They're not doctors, but they are supplying relevant information. And this now, the TLC organization, I think is working with 40 separate practices, or it might be 50 by now. And it was given a national award only 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow. That's great.
So there's that. We're running another thing, which is all about food addiction. And how do you help people who are struggling to give up the carbs? We are trying very hard to work with media. So we're doing that. And really, one of the reasons I'm on here today, of course, is to tell everybody we run international conferences every year. So my wife always said, if you want to become more influential, you need to find your tribe. You and I, Anthony, we're in the same tribe. We're going to help each other. I trust you right away. And the more we find people who we recognize doing the same, the more influential we are. And these conferences have gone from being very small to very large, the big budget. And we fly some of the cleverest people in the world into London, in this case. This is May the 18th and 19th and 20th. And there's 3 days of the people that we believe, including you, Anthony, as the real movers and shakers around the world in lifestyle medicine. These conferences are very important. You can either come or you can just do it virtually. And many, many people do. Just look up Public Health Collaboration 2014 conference, and it's all there. We've got some amazing speakers. I don't know, who are you looking forward to meeting, Anthony?
Well, actually, yourself. I've actually long admired.
You
I'm
made me
not
now.
joking. I was very disappointed that I wasn't able to get there last year, and
Yeah, that was a shame.
yeah, and so I've actually been looking forward to this for quite some time, and to
Me
meet you.
too.
I always knew that we were definitely on the same brainwave
Yes.
as far as this is concerned. And as you say, it's always nice to meet people that are thinking along the same lines as you. They've sort of, they have drank the Kool-Aid, and they're just all right. Yep, I'm all in.
Yeah,
And,
we know it works, and
yeah.
one of us counts for 20 ordinary
Mm,
GPs or whatever, in terms of we don't clock off at 5 o'clock.
true.
We're doing it every day, and we really care. And it's just so exciting. Who am I looking forward to speaking? Oh, Dave Feldman. Have you met him? The
I have.
citizen
Yeah.
scientist.
Yeah. No, he's
So
great.
clever.
Yeah.
And he's done a deep dive into his own physiology.
Hmm.
And actually, the N=1 can be important. He
Absolutely.
does it so well, so well. Then you've got Gary Torbs, who's just written
Yes.
yet another bestseller.
Nice.
He's very interesting. He's a bit of a philosopher. I find him fascinating to talk to or listen to. And he'll be talking about my favorite subject, diabetes.
Mm.
So he's so interesting, really, really interesting. Then we've got Ellen Calto, who you may not know. She's a registered dietitian
Mm.
who is fascinated in food addiction. So she'll be talking about food addiction. So it's, anyway, 3 days. All I can say is please come, because we've spent a fortune flying people like you. We're paying for you to come around. So that's the charity that we've set up, the Public Health Collaboration,
Mm.
which is working at a political level. So we need to talk to politicians. And I was lucky enough to meet the Shadow Health Secretary in Parliament 2 weeks ago. And obviously, I bent his ear on this. So we're working politically. Even, planning permission, like how many junk food outlets do you allow near schools?
Mm.
What about advertising of food to children? That needs looking at. There are many, there's something for all of us to do. And that's why we thought, let's get a charity together of people who want to make a change. And many of them volunteer to become ambassadors or super ambassadors, or they're wonderful on social media or whatever. But that's been one of the ways. Another main way for us, I don't know, have you come across my teaspoons of sugar equivalents?
No, I don't think I've come across that
Oh,
one.
well, thank heavens we got to that. I wanted to find a way to help my patients understand how sugary carbohydrate foods were. And the glycemic load is really interesting. But one of my partners said that I was a glycemic load bore. And she said, for heaven's sake, will you find a better way to talk about the glycemic load? And it worked out, why don't you just get the glycemic load of a teaspoon of sugar and divide the glycemic load of a bowl full of cornflakes or a baked potato by the glycemic load of a teaspoon of sugar, then you've got the teaspoon of sugar equivalent of that food.
Mm.
So I can tell you that 150 grams of boiled rice is the same as 10 teaspoons of sugar in terms of the glycemic load.
Mm.
I can tell you that 150 grams of mashed potato is 9 teaspoons of sugar. A banana is 5.5 teaspoons of sugar.
Wow.
And I got together with Dr. Jeffrey Livesey, an international expert on this, and we published these teaspoon of sugar equivalents in 2016. They've now been translated into 35 languages. They're everywhere. They're massive. I'm going to have to bring some for you you need them up. They should be on your wall. That wall is
Definitely.
blank. Where are my teaspoon of sugar equivalents?
Yeah.
And I've done it for fruits. So some fruits are much sugary than others. Raspberries are pretty good. but bananas, mangoes are really bad. And I can tell you the teaspoon of sugar equivalents of 880 different foods, all of which is then translated into all these, I think it's 35 languages, it's going up all the time. These charts have been downloaded millions of times all around the world. And generally, it's the single most useful thing I've done with my life, probably.
Wow.
The single most useful thing. Because when you tell somebody that the rice they are eating is the same as 10 teaspoons of sugar, they realize maybe I could eat something else. And when you tell them, well, cauliflower rice has got 1/20th of the sugar in it, then they'll do it. And it's all about supplying, not bullying people, not shouting at them, but supplying relevant information that is useful to people. And then they can individualize their diet. So I'm not telling nobody, there aren't two of us with the same diet. Even Jen and I don't have the same diet. Each of us finds out what's tasty, how do we feel on that diet, can we afford it, and how does it sit with our beliefs? And so this idea of information and the sugar equivalent of food, if you have diabetes, is very, very useful. And then, of course, you can experiment with a continuous glucose monitor and find out if I'm lying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you shall have all my teaspoon of sugar equivalents. I shall bring them. I've got thousands.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, thousands and thousands.
Yeah.
So I'm glad. So yes, we're moving ahead in the media. We're using social media. We're using mainstream media. I've written about 35 articles for our most popular paper is the Daily Mail, and I've written 35 articles for them. So we're not just publishing. So we are publishing in BMJ Nutrition, BMJ, but we're also going to the broader media, because this message we have to get through. Almost, it's a grassroots revolution, you see. So many doctors are so tired that they're not doing it. So I'm trying to get directly to intelligent people to say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about sugar? Why don't you try? I'll tell you a story. Just before this podcast, we had my daughter's carpets cleaned, which we pay for, as mum and dad do. But the guy saw me a year ago and he said, you know what? A year ago, I met you. I gave up carbs. I want you to know my belly has vanished and I've been off all the drugs for blood pressure for 6 months.
Yeah.
My son has done it and my daughter has done it. And I was only with him for 5 minutes. I gave him one of my charts and talked to him. And a year later, we've done the same for our plumber, the decorator, the roofer, the farmers that live nearby. Success spreads. And Anthony, you've come across this because people, they look at you and they go, well, he looks fabulous. How did he do that? They're curious about success. And if it works, nobody can tell you to start eating bread. Nobody. You won't do it. I won't do it because I have done it and I know how I feel. And you don't need long with somebody, just 5 minutes with a carpet cleaner while I paid him. And I gave him the teaspoon of sugar equivalent. I said, just take this as my gift. And I just wonder whether you might find it interesting. And he couldn't wait to see me this morning to show me his transformation. Yeah. Isn't that wonderful?
That is. Oh, that's amazing. And that's it. You know, you said that, the N of 1 is very important. I think, honestly, it's the most important. I think the work that you're doing in publishing your work, yes, in the hierarchy of these sorts of things, it's lower down, but it's the real world evidence. It's the real world results.
Yes. And that's so just to the N equals 1. I came to Australia actually and did a presentation on this and it was very popular. And I've thought a lot about N equals 1. And I have a friend who's a medical statistician. And we worked out that if you have enough data points before and after, you can do a p-value on a single person. And we've been doing that. So you can work out the p-value. Is it likely that this person is fundamentally changed by the diet? What's the likelihood? Because that's what a p-value is. It's how likely is it that this has occurred by chance? So I'm now doing a series of n=1 with p-values. And if you're interested, I've written an editorial on this in BMJ Nutrition. And it's about the value of real world data and what clinicians, what do we bring to the party? And the RCTs don't necessarily show us the way out of this mess because they don't always roll out very well. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you start with something that's working in the real world and you can replicate it. So there are doctors all over the world who have published similar work to mine based on what I do in New Zealand, in Australia, in Malaysia, in Canada, in North America. So if something can be replicated in the real world, maybe that's an answer. Mm-hmm. And this is why I've got hope for you from the insurance companies. Mm. So Swiss Re are the second largest reinsurance company in the world. And they've been working with me for 6 years because they're fascinated by what I can achieve. And the insurance companies are paying for the international pandemics of metabolic syndrome and all this history. And they are the only ones with similar power to the drug companies. So I'm actually working with a few insurance companies because they are paying and they know their actuaries are telling them that life expectancy is dropping internationally. They know that multiple morbidity is claiming people. And so real world data is of great interest to them. And of course, data is the new oil. It's power. And what have clinicians got? We have data. In primary care, our computer systems are sophisticated. And I'd say everywhere, people in primary care, clinicians, frontline clinicians have far more power than we know. And the power is in our data. People will pay for your data, they'll take it. But think about what you can do with your data. Why don't you audit? Just a simple audit of baseline and latest follow-up. In the UK, you do not need ethics approval for audit. Audit is respectable work for a clinician. You should know I know the average weight loss in my clinic is 9.4 kilos at 30 months. I know what's happening. Okay. I know the average improvement in your blood pressure is 40 millimeters of mercury systolic and 7 millimeters of mercury diastolic, with a quarter of the patients have deprescribing of their blood pressure medication.
Oh.
You know what happens to the lipids? The triglyceride improves by a third on average. All of these things I know about people that come to Norwood Avenue. So I can say to you, Anthony, if you come to my clinic, I can probably achieve this. Mm-hmm. Now, why don't people running clinics? Why don't you audit your baseline and latest follow-up on consent? I consent the patients, but they love to consent. And then you can publish it. And that also, there is the Journal of Insulin Resistance. We have our own journal, publishing audit. I'm one of the editors. So it just opens up a whole new world for the power of clinicians. And our audit is not a humble thing, it's an important thing. Real world data matters. Mm-hmm. It matters equally to RCTs. And if you read my editorial in BMJ Nutrition, it was the 3rd of January, BMJ Nutrition this year, you'll see what I mean, where I'm looking a hard look at evidence-based medicine. It's a lot more than RCTs, a lot more. Mm-hmm. And another, I think at times I've become very depressed with what's happening because I see big pharma and big food claiming more and more lives, but there are green shoots, there is hope. There is hope. And one thing I would say is that our audit from what we achieved at Norwood Avenue is the most popular paper that BMJ Nutrition has ever published. Wow. Not the most popular last year, or it's just the most popular paper they have ever published. And that means that BMJ Nutrition will take other papers from me
because
they know that people read them. So it's the popularity, you see. The papers wish to be popular. You have to find out what are the levers of influence. Academic papers wish to be popular. Their impact factor matters. So if papers on audit and low carb sell, if they're read, as my paper was read many, many times, and it hit social media and main media, then the journals are looking for other papers. When I began with the first paper, nobody would publish me. Nobody. I was turned down for months. It's heartbreaking. And, if it hadn't been for Prof. Roy Taylor's hand, I never would have been published. But now the world has changed. There is interest. And a lot of this is through social media because it affects the impact factor of peer-reviewed papers. And, when you and I think you could become very influential, Anthony, because I'm old. So my years are obviously what I've got left is not much. But if I can help younger clinicians become dangerous, become impactful, and use social media and media, but also publish audit, that would be great. So that would be a great conversation for you and I when we meet in London.
That would be great. And yeah, I've thought about that as well, and trying to get data collected for our patient population.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah. No, I think that'd be
just do it.
Idea.
An Excel spreadsheet. Find yourself that you could learn how to do the stats. I have a statistician. You soon get your p-values, and it's a really respectable thing to say, in my clinic, this is what I achieve. And as I say, it also means the reason I did it, in the beginning, I received hate mail, actually made from dietitians. I really did. Horrible letters, or they would, when people heard my name, they would turn their back on me and refuse to speak. Wow. I was heckled and shouted at in public meetings. And I realized that what I did was irritating people. And also, let's be fair, I'd been wrong about how I practiced medicine for the first 25 years. Maybe I was wrong again. And the only way to find out whether I was wrong or not was collect careful data. Be methodical, collect data. It's easier now than it used to be. And so I collected data to check that lipid profiles did improve, to check what happens to renal function. I've written a paper on that, by the way. It improves.
Yeah.
And then every paper I've written, I will find a professor. So I found a professor of nephrology. He came to see my clinic. He knew some of my patients, and we audited what happened to renal function, the people at Norwood Avenue. And guess what? It improves significantly on low carb. And then I found Professor Brady, a professor of cardiology, and we looked at lipid profiles and blood pressure. And guess what? It improved significantly. So cooperating with academics, some of them are very interested in meeting clinicians. They're very interested in what we think we've seen, but they know clever stuff too. And it's been a great joy to partner with some of these clever academics. And as you can tell, I've become zealous in the idea that audit is not a low level of evidence. It can be a high level of evidence. And if you audit a population, which is similar to the population you practice medicine in, then actually it may be very powerful. A bit like an RCT. If they do an RCT that does not represent your population, that was my problem with RCTs, because they eliminate people with obesity, people with depression, people on antihypertensives. Those are all eliminated from RCTs. So the population you're left with isn't much like my patients at Norwood Avenue, who are on average about 65 and they weigh 100 kilos. And they've got diabetes and hypothyroidism and reflux esophagitis and depression, and they're on a load of medications. So the RCTs you see It's to do with internal and external validity, but you'll have to read my editorial to find out what that's about.
Yeah.
It's probably time to stop. I always talk too long.
No, you're fine. I know you have to run. You have your patients coming
I
on,
do.
but thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Please tell us where we can find you, more of your work, and how people can support
Thank
the
you.
public health collaboration.
Bless you. So on Twitter or X, I am at Low Carb GP.
Right?
I'm there every day, every day.
Yeah.
The public health collaboration is also on Twitter and many other social media things. Yes, support the public health collaboration. And if anything I ever do is useful to anybody out there, all I'd say is perhaps you would consider making a donation to our charity. I assure you, we're using every penny wisely, and I'll never know whether you do donate or you don't. But it's a thought, isn't it? And now, with many thanks, Anthony, I've enjoyed speaking to your enthusiasm is absolutely evident. Your eyes light up with when you're interested. And I think one or two other things, or I hope that one or two other things I said interested you. And I'm really looking forward to taking that conversation further, perhaps into the realms of evidence-based medicine. That would be interesting.
As am I. That would be fantastic.
See you in London.
See
you in
then.
London. Bye-bye
Thank
now.
you so much. Take care. Hey guys, thank you very much for taking the time out to listen to what I had to say. If you like it, then please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and podcast. And if you're on YouTube, then please hit that little bell and subscribe, and that'll let you know anytime I have a new video out, which should be every week, if not more. And if you could share this with your friends, that would help me get the word out and let me know that you like what I'm doing. Thanks again, guys.